I never told anyone why I took the job. Not the man in human resources who raised an eyebrow when I handed him the application. Not the supervisor who asked if I'd ever used an industrial floor polisher. And certainly not my son. To him, I was supposed to be back home, working odd jobs, maybe fixing up old houses, maybe disappearing into the quiet corners of life where parents go when their children leave for college. But instead, every evening when the sun dipped behind the red brick dormitories, I put on a navy blue uniform with a stitched name tag that read simply Robert, Janitor. At first, it felt almost noble. I told myself I was like a guardian spirit, wandering the same halls my son walked, unseen but present. When I swept the lecture hall at night, I imagined the same room filled with students by day, my boy somewhere among them, his head bent over a notebook, his future unwritten but bright. The sound of my broom against the tile became a lullaby, a rhythm that carried me through the loneliness. It was hard work, my back ached, my knees popped like dry wood, but there was a strange comfort in knowing that even the dirt I cleared away somehow paved his way forward. The first time I saw him on campus, my heart caught in my throat. He was walking with a group of friends, backpack slung over one shoulder, laughing at something on his phone. I froze, mop handle in hand, like a soldier at attention. I thought he might glance at me, maybe even recognize the way I stood, the way my shoulders leaned forward when I was tired. But he didn't. He walked past me like I was invisible, and maybe that was for the best. I wanted him to feel free here, to be just another college kid without the shadow of a janitor father trailing behind him. I learned to time my shifts around his schedule. When he had classes, I worked in another building. When he was in the cafeteria, I cleaned the library. Sometimes I would linger near the quad, sweeping leaves from the concrete path. From a distance, I watched him throw a football or sit cross-legged on the grass with his friends. I never stayed too long. A father can love his son deeply and still know when to remain unseen. There were small, almost holy moments, like when I polished the floor outside the chemistry lab and saw his handwriting scrawled on the notice board. Study group Tuesday, 7 p.m. Or when I emptied the trash in the student lounge and found a crumpled essay draft with his name at the top. Each scrap of his life, discarded or forgotten, felt like treasure to me, proof that he was here learning, becoming someone greater than both of us. But at night, when the campus grew quiet, doubt crept in. Was I doing the right thing? Would he be ashamed if he knew his father cleaned toilets just down the hall? I tried to push the thought away. I told myself this was love in its purest form, silent, sacrificial, without applause. A love that wears rubber gloves and smells faintly of disinfectant. Still, there were times when I paused in front of the mirror in the janitor's closet. The man staring back was tired, lines carved deep around his mouth. Not the father I wanted my son to remember. Not the man who used to toss him in the air or race him to the end of the street. One evening, after a long shift, I sat on the back steps of the dormitory. The sky was violet, fading into night. I heard laughter spilling from the windows above, his laughter among them, rich and alive. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. For a moment, it felt like I was part of it, included in a life I had paid for but no longer belonged to. Then the door swung open and a group of students rushed past me, not even noticing. I was just the janitor again. Just Robert. I whispered to the empty air. "I'm here, son. You don't see me, but I'm here." It was enough then, or at least I made myself believe it was. Because sometimes love hides in plain sight, and sometimes the greatest sacrifice is to be present without being acknowledged. I held onto that thought like a prayer, never knowing that the cruelest words were still waiting for me. Words that would undo every silent night, every polished floor, every dream I had kept alive. The truth is, numbers kept me awake at night. Not the kind you find on chalkboards or in textbooks, but the ones that showed up on bills, receipts, and the ledger I kept in a fraying notebook. $38,000. That was the price of 1 year at his college. Room, board, tuition, books, it all added up to a mountain I never thought I could climb. Yet somehow, each month I found a way. I worked maintenance during the day, fixing broken boilers, patching drywall in apartments most people wouldn't step into. At night I hauled pallets in a warehouse, hands blistered from cardboard cuts, back screaming under the fluorescent lights. Every dollar I earned I tucked away with quiet precision. Rent came first, food second, the electric bill if I was lucky. Whatever remained, I wired straight to the bursar's office. I never told him how much it cost me. I never told him how many times I went to bed hungry, or how many winters I spent in a coat indoors because the heating bill was too high. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that his tuition was paid in full on time every semester. There's a certain dignity in sacrifice that no one else sees. I remember standing in line at the bank, cashing out another paycheck. The teller smiled politely, not knowing that I was moving the lifeblood of my body into his future. Sometimes I'd hold the receipt in my hand, the string of digits confirming the payment, and feel both relief and emptiness. Relief that he was still on track. Emptiness because the money represented so many hours of my life I'd never get back. But isn't that what fatherhood is? Trading pieces of yourself willingly so your child can step into a world you never reached. There were moments when the weight of it all nearly broke me. Like the winter the pipes froze in my apartment. I didn't have enough left to call a plumber, so I boiled pots of water on the stove, carrying them to the bathroom to thaw the ice inch by inch. Or the summer my car died, and instead of fixing it, I sold it for scrap, walking 3 miles to the bus stop every morning at 5 a.m. I told no one, certainly not him, because in my mind, burdening him with my struggles would have cheapened his freedom. I wanted him to walk through those ivy-covered archways as if life had always been this smooth, as if the world had prepared a place for him without condition. Sometimes, though, I would allow myself a small indulgence. I would imagine his graduation day, the cap, the gown, the sea of students tossing their mortarboards into the sky, and I pictured myself standing in the back row, maybe in an old suit, clapping until my palms hurt. Not for the degree itself, but for the knowledge that every broom I pushed, every box I lifted, every hour I endured had carried him there. The thought was enough to keep me going. The image of his smile, radiant with accomplishment, pulled me through nights when my body begged to quit. There is a strange kind of silence that comes with sacrifice. No applause, no spotlight, no acknowledgement. Just the quiet shuffle of bills being paid and the quiet ache of muscles used beyond their limit. I learned to love that silence. It became my companion, my confessor. When the world slept, I whispered into it the prayers I couldn't say out loud. Keep him safe. Let him find joy. Don't let him ever feel ashamed of me. One afternoon, while scrubbing a set of stairs on campus, I overheard a group of students talking about internships. They threw around names of cities: New York, San Francisco, Chicago. One boy groaned about his parents tightening the budget. Another joked about how his dad still drove the same car from the 90s. I caught myself smiling. If only they knew. If only they knew what parents really gave up to get them here. And then, like a wave, the truth struck me: my son was among them. Maybe he never even thought about where the tuition money came from. Maybe he assumed it appeared like clockwork from some invisible machine. That hurt, but I forgave it in advance. After all, wasn't that the point? For him to live without the weight I carried. Every broomstroke, every dollar set aside, every ache in my bones was part of a covenant I made silently with myself. He would never know the ledger I balanced, or the meals I skipped, or the nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan as numbers swirled in my head. He would know only freedom. He would know only opportunity. And I told myself that was enough. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was how silence can sometimes become its own prison. And how, one night, the silence I had lived with so faithfully would be shattered, not by debt, not by exhaustion, but by the sound of my son's voice, saying words that would cut deeper than poverty ever could. The first year passed more quickly than I expected. Each semester folded into the next, like pages in a book I couldn't stop turning, even when the story hurt. I saw him less than I thought I would. You'd think, being on the same campus, I might catch him often, crossing the quad, grabbing coffee, heading into the library. But the truth is, the closer I was in distance, the farther I felt in spirit. There were times when I spotted him from across the courtyard. He carried himself differently now, shoulders straighter, steps quicker, a kind of careless confidence that comes when you believe the world is waiting for you. He laughed easily with his friends, his hands flying as he told a story. They leaned in, listening, eyes on him. He belonged to them, not to me. And I stayed back, broom in hand, watching like a shadow at the edge of the frame. It's a strange ache being near someone you love but unable to reach out. I remembered the boy who used to grip my hand so tightly at the grocery store, afraid to lose me in the aisles. Now, if I brushed past him, he wouldn't even know. Once I was mopping near the science building when he came running down the steps clutching a folder. I stepped aside to let him pass. He didn't glance at me, didn't pause, didn't even notice the man holding the mop. And why would he? To him, I was just part of the scenery, like the vending machine in the hallway or the trash can by the door. At night, I lay in my narrow bed and tried not to let the loneliness eat me alive. I told myself he was busy, that he was supposed to outgrow me, that distance was part of the design. But still, the silence between us grew heavier, like dust collecting in corners you never quite clean. The holidays were the hardest. I stayed on campus through Thanksgiving, working double shifts while most of the students left town. The dining hall was dark, the dorms nearly empty. I imagined him at some friend's house, eating turkey, laughing at jokes, his plate full, and I was glad for it. But I also sat alone in the janitor's closet that night, chewing on a vending machine sandwich, pretending it tasted like home. There were letters I wanted to write. Not emails, not texts, real letters in my handwriting, with smudges of ink and bent corners. I even bought a stack of lined paper, kept it in the drawer by my bed. But each time I picked up the pen, I hesitated. What would I say? Son, I'm here. I'm the janitor down the hall. No, that wasn't what he needed. He needed to believe he had risen above me, not that I was still crouching on the floor behind him. So the paper stayed blank and my silence grew thicker. One cold evening in February, I watched him walk out of the library with a girl. They were laughing softly, the kind of laughter people share when secrets are exchanged. She brushed snow from his coat sleeve and he let her. Something in my chest twisted, not out of jealousy, but out of the realization that his life had chapters I would never be part of. He was writing them with people I would never meet, in places I would never go. I wondered if he ever thought of me in those moments. If my name crossed his mind when the snow fell, or when he felt proud of himself. Or if, to him, I was already fading like the janitor who cleaned the floor last night, gone without a trace by morning. The hardest part wasn't the distance. It was the quiet acceptance that crept in alongside it. I began to expect nothing. No phone call, no wave from across the quad, no glance of recognition. And in some strange way that hurt less. If I expected nothing, I couldn't be disappointed. If I told myself this was the way it was meant to be, I could keep moving my broom, keep signing my paychecks over to tuition, keep breathing through the hollow nights. But every now and then, something small broke through my defenses. Like the time I found a photo of him taped to the student bulletin board. He was standing with his club, smiling, arms slung around a friend. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that face, memorizing the curve of his smile as if I hadn't seen it in years. And in a way, I hadn't. Because the boy in that photo looked like a man who no longer needed me. And I looked like a ghost, haunting his world without a place in it. The distance grew quietly, invisibly, like a crack in a wall you don't notice until the whole structure gives way. And though I told myself it was normal, part of growing up, part of letting go, somewhere deep inside I knew this wasn't just distance. This was erasure. And it was only a matter of time before I would hear the words that proved it. Friday nights on campus have their own weather. Not rain or wind, something warmer, noisier. Laughter hangs in the air like steam. Music leaks out from cracked doors. The smell of takeout drifts down stairwells and settles in corners no one thinks to sweep. I was pushing the gray cart down the second-floor corridor of Linden Hall, collecting the end of the week, pizza boxes bowed like cardboard boats, bottles clinking, a trail of napkins that looked like small surrendered flags. My shift had run late. A clogged sink, a door that wouldn't latch, a professor who dropped a box of chalk in the stairwell as if white dust were a blessing. By the time I reached the lounge, the lights were low and a string of bulbs, those cheap festival kind, made the room look softer than it was. I set the cart's brake and pulled on a pair of fresh gloves. The lounge tables wore sticky rings from cups that had sweated themselves into permanent stains. A poster on the wall announced a midterm distress night. Someone had drawn a smiley face over the word stress, so that the O in no winked like it knew better. Voices floated from the other side of the room divider. 5, maybe 6, their words braided together until a laugh shook the thread loose. I didn't mean to hear. I never meant to hear. I picked up cups. I righted a chair with one leg shorter than the others. I found a set of keys on a windowsill and tucked them in the lost and found pouch. Then I heard a voice I knew like my own heartbeat. "Come on, man. Your parents coming for family weekend." My hand stopped. I didn't turn. I listened with my back. There was a pause I recognized, the way he always paused before telling a story, a tiny intake of breath, the sound of a page turning in his head. "Nah," he said, lightly. "My mom, she's not around." And then almost casually, as if closing a window to keep the noise out, he added, "My dad's been dead for years." The word fell heavy. Dead. Something in my chest shifted, a shelf breaking inside a closet long overfilled. Someone whistled soft sympathy. "Dude, sorry, I didn't know." "It's okay," my boy said, and I heard a smile he must have learned from the world. "It's been a long time." Another voice tried to soften it with jokes. "Explains the grind, though. You're always on your own stuff. Respect." Chairs scuffed. A bottle cap pinged across the floor. Miles, one of the friends, I'd learned his name by accident, said, "You never talk about him." "There's not much to talk about," my son answered. "He wasn't really the type to be around." I stood very still, my hand gripping a plastic bag so tight the seams squealed. An hour before, I'd unclogged a sink backed up with noodles and broth, and the smell had turned my stomach. Now all I felt was clean emptiness. On the far wall, a vent hummed. The string lights buzzed like tired bees. I noticed every small sound because the big one inside me, whatever had been beating there, had gone quiet. They began to talk about a party on the North Quad. A girl laughed. A bright silver sound. Two boys argued about a playlist like it mattered. My son said something about a ride, about meeting by the steps in 10. I took one breath, then another. I stepped back to the cart and released the brake. The wheels squeaked, a pathetic little cry, and the cart rolled forward as if it knew where to go. Before I left the lounge, I turned enough to see the backs of their heads. His hair had grown out. He'd let it curl a little at the nape like he used to when he thought cool meant not trying too hard. He wore a gray sweatshirt with the college name across the front, sleeves shoved to the elbows. He looked healthy. He looked loved. He had called me dead. And the room had nodded as if it were a fact, a historical detail, a line in a bio you scroll past. I moved down the corridor, not trusting my legs to carry me if I stopped. The cart rattled over a crack in the tile. I steadied it, then myself. A poster for a blood drive fluttered as I passed, the paper lifting and lying down again as if breathing. In the stairwell, I leaned my forehead against the cool paint for a moment, the way you do when your head crowds with too many rooms. I didn't cry. There is a kind of pain that sits too deep for tears, a stone lowered into a well. On the landing, two students squeezed by me, smelling of soap and cologne, laughing about a professor who spoke in metaphors. "Excuse me, sir," one said with a polite nod, and I heard the kindness as a foreign language. I took the stairs slowly. Each step reported to my knees, and my knees confessed the day. Down on the first floor, I pushed through the door that led outside. Night had settled, pooling between buildings. The grass kept the day's heat like a whispered promise. I could hear music from somewhere, the thump of borrowed courage. I walked the path that curved behind Linden Hall, the one the delivery vans used, where the pavement cracked into a jigsaw of weeds. The dumpsters stood in a row like patient animals, the lids lifted without complaint. I fed them the week's offerings, the cups, the cardboard boats, the surrendered flags. When the cart was empty, I sat on its edge. Somewhere above, a cheer went up and faded. A moth bit itself against the security light again and again, unable to learn a kinder orbit. I tried out the word on my tongue the way a man tests a sore tooth. Dead. It didn't belong to me. It didn't belong to him either, but he had worn it in public and it had fit well enough that his friends didn't tug at the seams. I thought of the ledger folded in my drawer, the steady chain of payments, the way each link had been forged with hours and tendon and sleep. I thought of the winters I'd crossed without heat. I thought of the future I had hired on his behalf, paid in advance, no refunds. There are many ways to vanish from a life. One is to actually go. Another is to stay hidden until you become so quiet the person you love can speak over you as if you aren't there. Behind me, the lounge door banged open. Footsteps, voices, the jangling, easy sound of young people heading somewhere they haven't been yet. I didn't turn. I didn't want to see his face wearing the sentence he'd handed me. The cart creaked as I stood. I rolled it back toward the maintenance room, each squeak marking time. in the small square of that room. I peeled off my gloves, dropped them into the bin, set the keys, sink, closet, supply cage on the hook where they belonged. My hands, freed, looked older than the rest of me, as if they had lived twice. When I finally spoke, it was to the air that holds men up when no one else will. "Okay," I said. "Okay." The word folded into the room's dull corners. It didn't answer me. I didn't expect it to. I switched off the light. The building sighed. Outside, the campus kept breathing its Friday weather. Inside, a father learned how to carry a new kind of silence. The night I heard those words, "My dad's been dead for years," I carried them back to my room the way a man carries broken glass, careful, close, but cutting myself at every step. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in the janitor's uniform, hands stiff with dried soap and dust. The radiator ticked like an old clock with no rhythm. I could still hear his voice in my skull, playing over and over, like the needle of a record skipping at the same groove. "Dead, dead, dead." I whispered it out loud once, just to test if it sounded different coming from me. It didn't. Grief is strange when the person you grieve is alive. There is no funeral, no casket, no neighbors bringing casseroles to fill your fridge. There is only the quiet realization that someone has already buried you in their heart. I thought of his childhood bedroom at home. The posters on the walls, the baseball glove on the dresser, the crayon drawings he once taped to the fridge. In that little house, I was alive in every corner. But here, in this place I had worked so hard to afford for him, I was nothing more than a name erased. I lay back on the thin mattress, stared at the ceiling, and tried to breathe. The ceiling fan spun slowly, blades wobbling like it might come loose and fall. I almost wished it would. For days after, I couldn't bring myself to walk near him. If I heard his laugh echoing down a hallway, I turned away. If I saw his shadow through a window, I ducked into a stairwell. I cleaned the far side of campus, taking assignments others avoided. Everywhere I went, I carried those words in my chest like stones rattling in a bucket. He told them I was dead. Maybe, I thought, maybe he said it as a joke. Maybe it slipped out, a careless line to make himself look interesting. Kids say things. I told myself that again and again. But the way his friends responded, the nods, the quiet pity that wasn't laughter, that was belief. And belief, once planted, grows deep. I began to question everything. Had I pushed too hard when he was young? Did I embarrass him with the grease on my hands, the dirt under my nails? Did he ever wish for a different father, one who wore a tie and drove a shiny car? The mind is cruel when it wants to be. It digs up every memory, polishes it into a weapon, and turns it against you. I remembered the time I came to his high school basketball game still in my work boots, dust clinging to my shirt. I had clapped too loud, shouted his name too proudly. Afterward, he wouldn't look me in the eye. At the time, I thought it was just teenage pride. Now, in the shadow of those words, I wondered if that was the beginning. At night, the silence pressed harder. The walls of the room seemed closer. The hum of the refrigerator in the hallway grew louder. I stopped writing prayers. I stopped opening my notebook of numbers. What did it matter anymore? If in his mind I was already gone, what was the point of bleeding myself dry to keep his life afloat? I thought of my wife, how she used to whisper to our son, "Your father worked so hard for you, don't ever forget that." She was gone for real, and now in his story I was too. It felt like he had buried us together. The next time I saw him, I froze in place. He was walking with the same group of friends, their backpacks bouncing, their voices high with youth. He passed within arm's reach of me. I wanted to stop him. I wanted to grab his sleeve and ask, "Why? Why did you say it? Do you hate me that much?" But the words stuck. My throat tightened like a fist. Instead, I lowered my head and kept sweeping, brushing dust into the pan like it was the only thing I knew how to do. He laughed at something a friend said. The sound rolled over me, light and careless, and I realized it wasn't meant for me anymore. I was no longer part of his audience. Later that evening, when the hall was empty, I found myself standing in front of the student lounge again. The chairs were scattered. The smell of cheap beer still hung in the air. I sat down at one of the tables. My hands rested flat against the sticky wood. I imagined him sitting here earlier, maybe talking about music or a girl or a dream that had nothing to do with me. I tried to picture him telling someone I was gone, and I realized I couldn't. Not because I hadn't heard it, I had, but because I couldn't reconcile it with the boy who once clung to me in crowded stores, who once asked if I'd always be there when he woke up. That boy had vanished. In his place was a man who needed me to disappear to make his own story fit. There are moments in life when silence becomes unbearable. Not the silence of a quiet room, but the silence of a heart that no longer calls for you. That night, I knew something inside me had cracked, quietly but permanently. I had lived years in sacrifice, years in shadows, and I thought I could endure it forever. But hearing my own death spoken by my living son, that was a silence I could not carry. The Monday after, I returned to work as if nothing had happened. I punched the time clock, rolled the cart down the corridor, and nodded to the security guard on duty. From the outside, I was the same man as before, navy blue uniform, rubber gloves, the faint scent of bleach trailing behind me. But inside, I wasn't the same. Inside, I was already dead. When I walked those hallways now, it was no longer as a father hiding in plain sight. It was as a ghost, and ghosts don't expect to be seen. They simply hover, unnoticed, tidying up what the living leave behind. I caught myself moving quieter than usual. I pushed the mop slower, eased the wheels of the cart over cracks so they wouldn't squeal. I avoided the lounges when students gathered, choosing instead to clean after the laughter had burned out and the last light had been switched off. It wasn't about fear anymore. It was about preserving the illusion. If he had already buried me in his story, then who was I to claw my way out of the ground? Still, every hallway whispered reminders. There was the stairwell with the chipped railing I had painted years ago when he was in high school trying to fix up our old house. He had sat nearby on the steps, swinging his legs, asking questions about why paint smelled the way it did. There was the music room where I sometimes paused outside and listened to the muffled thump of a piano. He'd never played, but his mother had. And in those muffled notes I could almost hear her again. And there was the student union, where flyers littered the floor, study abroad, internships, summer programs. Worlds opening wide for him, even as mine had narrowed to a closet with a mop sink and a bunk bed. I began to think of myself as part of the building, like the pipes that rattled or the exit signs that hummed faintly all night, essential but invisible, needed but unseen. There was a certain safety in that role. Ghosts can't be rejected. Ghosts don't feel the sting of being ignored. They simply exist in the margins, carrying on with their silent duties. At least that's what I told myself. One night, while vacuuming the long carpeted hall of the library's top floor, I saw him through the glass. He was at a table with 3 other students, heads bowed over open laptops. Their screens glowed like tiny campfires in the dark. He looked tired but alive, his hair falling into his face as he typed. The girl from the snowy night was beside him. She leaned in, pointing at something on his screen, and he smiled at her in a way I hadn't seen in years. I stood there, vacuum still humming in my hands, watching like a man pressed to the glass of an aquarium. They were the fish, darting in bright colors. I was the man outside, breathing a different air never meant to enter. After a while, I turned the vacuum back on and moved down the hall, leaving him to his world. Sometimes I wondered if he ever sensed me, a flicker in the corner of his vision, a shadow moving just beyond the edge of light. Did he ever feel a chill on the back of his neck and think, someone's here, only to dismiss it as nothing? That is what it felt like to be a ghost, to hover so close you could almost touch, but to know your presence would only unsettle, embarrass, or worse, bring shame. And so I swallowed myself shift by shift, night by night. There's a loneliness in being alive but invisible. In the world of the living, people pass you every day without their eyes ever landing on yours. You hold doors open and they step through without thanks. You empty trash bins and they drop more into them without pause. You polish the floor and they scuff it before it dries. I told myself this was fine. This was what I had chosen. But when you've been declared dead by the very person you raised, invisibility begins to feel less like a choice and more like a sentence. I remember one particular morning. The sun had just started leaking through the tall chapel windows, dust swirling like tiny galaxies in the beams of light. I stood in the back, mop in hand, while students trickled in for early prayers. I thought of stepping forward, sitting on one of the wooden pews, folding my hands the way I used to when my wife was alive. But the uniform felt like chains around me. If he walked in and saw me there, would he look away? Would he whisper to the girl beside him, "That's just the janitor"? So I slipped out before the first hymn began. I lived like that for weeks, between shadows and silence. Between life and the death my son had spoken into existence. Each night I told myself I was finished with wanting more. Each night I tried to believe it, but a father's heart is stubborn. It keeps beating even when it's been declared gone, and mine beat against my ribs like it was trying to prove him wrong. What I didn't realize then was that ghosts don't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, someone sees them, and when they do, the world changes. Decision did not arrive in a single flash. It crept in like water seeping under a door. One morning I woke, pulled on the uniform, tied the laces of my work boots, and for the first time in years my hands refused to move with purpose. The mop leaned against the wall. The cart sat waiting. But I just sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at the folded application papers I had saved from that first day. They were yellowed now, the corners curling, the ink faded. I remembered filling them out with such care, making sure every letter of my name was clear. Robert Flores, not Dad, not Father, just another man looking for work. Back then the papers had felt like a doorway, a secret way back into his world. Now they looked more like shackles. The closet smelled of ammonia and damp rags. I opened the door and began to pull things down one by one. The gloves thin, powdery from too much bleach. The uniform shirts, folded into squares that had lost their blue, turned into a tired gray. The heavy boots that had learned the shape of my feet so well they could probably walk without me. I stacked everything carefully, as if the act of order could keep my heart from breaking further. On the highest shelf was the old thermos my wife had given me years ago. A dent marred its side from when I dropped it on a job site. She used to fill it with coffee so strong it could keep me awake for 2 shifts. I hadn't filled it in months. I carried water now, cheaper. I set it on top of the pile. It wobbled, then stilled. Filling out the resignation slip took less time than filling out the original application. 2 lines, that was all. My name, today's date. When I signed the bottom, the pen pressed so hard it nearly tore the paper. My hand trembled as I laid it down. Not from age, not from fatigue, from the weight of letting go. I thought about the years behind me, the endless hours, the ledger filled with numbers, the silent prayers whispered into empty rooms. What were they if not dreams made physical? Every dollar I sent to the school was a brick laid in the house of his future. Every meal skipped, every mile walked without a car, every bone-deep ache, all of it was mortar. And now, by walking away, it felt like I was abandoning that house mid-construction, leaving it half-built, roofless, exposed to the weather. But what good is a house if the person you built it for pretends you never existed? I placed the resignation slip in a plain envelope and slid it under the supervisor's office door. The sound it made, a faint whisper on tile, echoed louder in my ears than any slammed door. For a long moment I just stood there, staring at the thin rectangle of paper. It looked so small, so harmless, and yet it was the final nail in my own coffin. I walked back to my room with empty hands. No gloves, no mop, no cart squeaking along behind me. Only silence. The room looked bare, though nothing had changed. The bed was still narrow, the window still stubborn to open, but without the uniform draped over the chair, without the boots by the door, it felt as though the walls themselves had shifted. I sat down and opened the drawer where my ledger rested. Pages of neat handwriting stared back at me, columns of dates and dollar amounts, sacrifices measured in ink. I ran my fingers over the numbers, the way a man might trace names on a gravestone. Each line was a memory, a roof repaired, a night spent loading pallets, a weekend doubled over with muscle cramps. This book had been my proof, my receipts, evidence that I had been here, that I had given everything. Now it was only a relic of a dream that no longer belonged to me. I closed the ledger and slid it back into the drawer. On top, I placed the stack of unused lined paper I had once bought for letters I never wrote. The paper was still crisp, untouched, as if it had been waiting for me to find courage. But courage never came. That night I lay in bed fully dressed, staring at the dark ceiling. The building around me breathed in its usual rhythm, pipes ticking, floorboards settling, the far-off hum of the vending machine. But for the first time, I wasn't listening for his laughter through the walls. I wasn't waiting for the echo of his footsteps in the hall. I wasn't holding my breath for a chance glimpse of him in the crowd. I was already gone, and the dreams I had carried, the ones I folded into every dollar, every sacrifice, every weary night, I packed them away with the uniform, the boots, the thermos. Not thrown out, not destroyed. Just sealed in boxes the world would never open. Because sometimes a father's love is not enough to keep him alive in his son's story. And sometimes the kindest thing a ghost can do is fade. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. Not the other janitors who nodded to me at the time clock. Not the supervisor who would find the envelope under his door. Not even the security guard who always greeted me with a tired smile. Ghosts don't announce their departures. They just stop showing up. The morning I walked off campus for the last time, the sky was gray and flat like a chalkboard wiped clean. I carried one small duffel, the same one I had owned since my 20s. Inside were the folded uniforms, the boots, the thermos, my life in nylon and zippers. The halls were quiet but not empty. Students passed me in both directions, some yawning, some laughing, some with earbuds sealing them off from the world. I pushed through the crowd without a word. Not a single face turned toward me. It struck me then how easy it is to disappear when no one expects you to exist. At the front steps of the administration building, I paused. From here, you could see the bell tower that chimed every hour, the flag snapping against the wind, the wide lawn stretching out like a green sea. I had once thought of this place as holy ground. Every brick, every polished window pane, every stretch of grass had been proof that my sacrifice meant something. Now it felt like a stage where I had no lines, no part to play. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the cold, until my hands began to stiffen around the strap of my bag. Then I turned and walked toward the gate. On the way out, I passed the dining hall. Through the glass, I caught a glimpse of him, my son, sitting at a table with his friends. He was mid-laugh, his mouth open wide, his eyes bright. The sound didn't reach me, but I could see it in the way his shoulders shook. I stopped for half a second. The old reflex rose in me, the urge to wave, to call his name, to walk in and ask how he was doing. But the memory of his voice, calm, casual, declaring me gone, stiffened my legs. I turned away before he could look up, before he could notice the man outside the glass and feel that same flicker of shame. The gate loomed ahead, tall black iron bars, always open but always heavy. I had passed through them countless times before, each time returning by nightfall. This time, I knew I wouldn't be coming back. I placed my hand on the cold metal. It felt like the edge of a map. Beyond it lay streets I had walked for years, bus stops, empty diners, a one-room apartment that smelled of plaster dust. Behind it lay the world I had built for him, a world where I no longer belonged. As I stepped through, a gust of wind pushed at my back. It carried with it the faintest sound, bells from the tower striking noon, 12 notes slow and deliberate. They followed me down the sidewalk until distance swallowed them whole. I didn't look back, not once. The bus stop was 3 blocks away. I walked slowly, duffel heavy at my side. The streets were lined with bare trees, their branches like bones scratching at the sky. Cars rushed past, filled with people on their way to places they were expected, wanted. I sat on the bench and set the bag at my feet. The paint on the metal slats was chipped, revealing rust underneath. I pressed my hands into my lap to stop them from shaking. A young couple stood nearby, holding coffee cups, laughing softly. The boy brushed the girl's hair back from her face. For a moment, I saw myself there years ago with his mother. We had been young once too, full of dreams we never got to finish. The bus roared up in a cloud of exhaust. I climbed aboard, fed the machine a few crumpled bills, and found a seat in the back. Out the window, the college shrank with each block. The bell tower sank behind the rooftops until only the very tip showed above the trees. Then even that was gone. I stared at the glass, but all I could see was my own reflection, tired eyes, lines deep around my mouth, uniform collar still stiff against my neck. In that moment, I understood something I had been avoiding. I had not just been paying for his tuition. I had been paying for the privilege of existing in his world even as a ghost. And now that privilege was gone. The bus rattled through intersections, past storefronts with for lease signs, past families walking with grocery bags in their arms. I thought of the years ahead. No more tuition payments, no more nights in the hallways, just me, my hands, and the silence I carried. There is a peculiar finality in choosing to vanish. It isn't like death, where the choice is stolen from you. It's more like folding yourself into a box and sealing the lid, not because you want to, but because you know someone else has no room for you anymore. The city blurred past the window, gray against gray. I leaned back in the seat, closed my eyes, and let the road carry me wherever it would. In his story, I was already gone. Now at last I was gone in mine. The first days after I left the campus passed like smoke, thin, formless, impossible to hold. I went back to patching drywall and hauling scrap lumber, the kind of work that left dust in my lungs and silence in my pockets. The uniform lay folded inside my duffel, out of sight. But in my mind, I was still walking those hallways at night, still hearing his laughter spill down stairwells I wasn't welcome to climb. I thought my story would stay buried there in the shadows, but shadows have a way of revealing themselves even when you want them to stay hidden. It was a girl who saw me first. Not my son, he never looked my way. Not his friends, they were too busy chasing the next party, the next laugh. She was small, quiet, the kind of student who carried more books than seemed possible. I had noticed her once or twice in the library, hunched over a table, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She had one of those faces you don't forget, not because it was remarkable, but because it carried an attentiveness rare in this place. One evening, weeks before I left, I was scrubbing gum off the underside of a desk near where she sat. She glanced down at me just once, but instead of looking through me, she looked at me. Her eyes held a kind of softness, the kind that doesn't flinch at dirt under fingernails. She didn't say anything then. She just nodded, a small gesture of respect before returning to her notes. It was the first time in a long while I felt less like a ghost. I didn't know it, but she had been there that night in the lounge. Not with his group, not laughing at his jokes. She had been at a table in the corner, headphones in, sketching something in a notebook. She heard the words too. "My dad's been dead for years." She told me later that she had looked up, confused, glancing at me as I froze with the trash bag in my hand. She saw the way my shoulders sank, the way I slipped out of the room without meeting anyone's eyes. Most people would have dismissed it, but she didn't. When I disappeared from campus, she noticed. The quiet man in the navy blue uniform was suddenly gone. The broom left leaning against the wall, the cart pushed by someone else. She asked around casually at first. "Where's Robert?" The janitor with the gray hair. No one seemed to know. Some shrugged, some barely remembered me at all. One boy laughed. Which janitor? They all looked the same. But she remembered, and the memory wouldn't leave her alone. Weeks later, she sat in her dorm room scrolling through her phone when she opened the app everyone lived on, TikTok. She had been filming small moments all semester. Sunsets on the quad, late-night study sessions, cafeteria food reviews. That night she opened the camera not with a script but with something heavy on her heart. She spoke softly, almost like she was telling a secret to a friend. "There was this janitor at my school," she began. "Older guy. He worked nights, always quiet, always kind. He'd pick up trash without complaining, mop the floors after we left them sticky. You probably wouldn't have noticed him, most people didn't." She paused, looking down for a moment, then she lifted her eyes again. "But I noticed, because one night I heard something. I heard a boy, one of my classmates, say his dad had been dead for years. And the janitor, he was standing right there." He froze. He looked like someone had just pulled the ground out from under him, and then he walked away. She swallowed, her voice catching. "I don't know the whole story, but I know this: no one should ever be ashamed of the people who sacrifice for them. I think that man was his father, and if I'm right, then that boy doesn't know how lucky he is." The video was barely a minute long, but sometimes a minute is enough to change everything. She posted it, probably expecting nothing. Maybe a handful of views, a few sympathetic comments. Instead, by the next morning, it had been watched 50,000 times. By the end of the week, it had crossed into the millions. I didn't know any of this at first. I was too busy hauling lumber, patching ceilings, trading hours for rent money. My phone was an old flip model, scratched and slow. I rarely checked it except for missed calls that never came. But one evening, while waiting at a bus stop, a boy on the bench beside me was scrolling on his phone. His laughter was loud, the kind that drew looks from strangers. "Dude, you gotta see this," he said to his friend. He turned the screen just enough that I caught a glimpse, and there it was, her face framed by the dorm room wall, her voice spilling into the night air. "There was this janitor at my school." I froze. My chest tightened. For the first time in years, my story was being told. Not by me, not by him, but by someone who had seen through the shadows and spoken it aloud. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or terrified. The world has a way of hearing what it wants. Sometimes you can whisper a truth for years and no one will notice. Then a stranger says it once into the glow of a phone screen and suddenly millions are listening. Her video spread like fire on dry grass. I didn't see it right away, but the numbers climbed: 30,000 views, 100,000, then a million. By the time someone showed it to me on the bus, it had already circled the globe. The comments came fast, faster than anyone could read. Some were short, raw, the kind you could almost hear shouted into a crowded room. How could a kid say his dad is dead when he's working to pay his tuition? This broke my heart. That man deserves the world. Respect your parents, period. Others told their own stories like tiny echoes of my life. My mom cleaned houses to put me through school. I'll never forget it. My dad drove trucks overnight so I could have braces. I'm crying watching this. And then there were the angry ones, the ones that bled outrage. If I ever told people my dad was dead when he wasn't, he'd make it true. Some kids don't deserve the sacrifices their parents make. The words were fierce, but underneath them I heard what I had longed for all along: recognition. For the first time, someone was saying out loud that I existed, that what I had done mattered. The girl who had posted it never named him. She didn't show his face. She didn't say my name. But stories have a way of pointing themselves toward their owners. Students on campus began to whisper. Who was the boy? Who was the janitor? Screenshots of the video flooded Instagram. Twitter threads stretched on for miles. TikTok stitched and restitched her words, each voice adding its own outrage, its own grief. A hashtag was born, #JanitorDad, and with it, an avalanche. One evening, after another long day on the job site, I stopped at a laundromat. My uniform was still stuffed in the duffel. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. While the machines hummed, I scrolled through my old flip phone. Messages had piled up, numbers I didn't recognize, friends I hadn't spoken to in years, even my sister. Is this you in that video? Call me. Please tell me this isn't about Michael. I didn't answer. I just closed the phone and set it on the plastic chair beside me. Across the room, a girl laughed, holding up her phone for a friend. I caught just enough of the screen to see my own silhouette, bent over a mop, caught in the background of her shaky footage. It was like looking into a mirror that had been turned toward the world. By the next morning, news outlets had picked it up. Heartbreaking viral video. Student denies his janitor father. Millions outraged at college kid's lie. They used still frames from the TikTok. Girl's tearful face, the caption in white letters, the blurry glimpse of me pushing the cart. They didn't need names. The story was bigger than us now. I tried to disappear into my work, but the world would not let me. At the hardware store, a cashier looked twice and asked softly, "Were you on TikTok?" At the diner, a waitress refilled my coffee without charge, eyes shining with something like pity. Everywhere I went, strangers looked at me a second longer than usual, as if testing the outlines of my face against the ghost they'd seen on their screens. And for the first time, I felt the weight of being seen. Meanwhile, back on campus, the whispers grew louder. I heard later that professors were bringing it up in class, turning it into lectures about respect, gratitude, family. Students argued in dining halls, some defending him, most condemning. One boy tweeted, "If you're hiding your dad because of what he does for a living, maybe you're the one who should be ashamed." It went viral on its own, liked by 500,000 strangers. My son's name wasn't in the original video, but it didn't take long for someone to connect the dots. A photo of him with his friends appeared in the comments, then another, and another. The internet has a way of unmasking the guilty. Once it smells blood, it doesn't stop. I sat in my apartment that night, the TV on but sound muted. My hands trembled in my lap. Part of me wanted to shield him, to stand up even now and say, "No, you've got it wrong. Leave him be." But another part of me, quieter, older, worn down by years of silence, stayed still. Because hadn't he chosen this? Hadn't he buried me himself? And if the world was now digging me back up, maybe it wasn't my fight to stop. The video played again on the news. The girl's words filled the room. No one should ever be ashamed of the people who sacrifice for them. I closed my eyes. I let the sound wash over me. For the first time in years, someone had spoken the sentence I had been carrying in my heart. Not as a whisper in the dark, but as a voice heard by millions. And while I sat there in silence, the world began to rage on my behalf. The internet is quick to build you up, but it's even quicker to drag you down. One moment you're just another college kid, invisible among thousands. The next, you're a villain in a story the whole country has decided to tell. It didn't take long for them to find him. The video had never mentioned his name, but faces don't stay hidden when millions of eyes are searching. Someone recognized him in the background of a photo on the school's website. Someone else matched his Instagram to the laugh they remembered in the clip. By the end of the week, his name was trending. At first, the comments were vague. Who would do this? What kind of son lies like that? Then they sharpened. His name is Michael, he's in the business program. I have class with him, this is the guy. Yep, that's him. Always acts like he's better than everyone. Screenshots of his profile spread like wildfire. Pictures from parties, selfies in front of the campus fountain, group shots with his fraternity brothers, all of it now pinned beneath captions dripping with judgment. The internet had chosen its villain. He started losing friends before he even realized what was happening. The girl I had seen with him, the one who brushed snow from his sleeve, stopped returning his texts. People who once leaned in when he spoke now shifted away. In lecture halls, the seats beside him stayed empty. Even the professors weren't blind. One of them, a silver-haired woman who had always been kind to me when I vacuumed her office, looked at him during class with a disappointment so sharp it could cut. Shame doesn't announce itself. It seeps in quietly the way cold does when a window won't close, and before long you feel it in your bones. He tried to fight back. I know this because the news carried snippets of his posts. It's not true. That guy wasn't my dad. People are just making things up. But the internet doesn't care for denial. It feeds on certainty, on outrage, on the satisfaction of unmasking a fraud. Liar, ungrateful brat. Your janitor dad deserves better. And with each comment, his own voice grew smaller until it was swallowed whole. Meanwhile, I stayed quiet. I went to work, kept my head down, and told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. But inside, I felt the tremors. I had wanted to be invisible. Now, suddenly, I was everywhere and not by choice. My silhouette in the background of a video had become a symbol, a rallying cry, a mirror held up to a culture hungry for justice. But the boy at the center of it all, he was paying a price I had never intended him to pay. I pictured him walking across the quad, every pair of eyes following. I pictured the whispers, that's him, that's the one. I pictured him checking his phone late at night, scrolling through comments that burned hotter than any words he had ever thrown at me. I knew what shame felt like. I had carried it in silence for years. But this was different. This was public. And shame in public is a fire that doesn't stop at the person who lit it. It spreads, catching on every corner of their life until even the people standing nearby feel the heat. One evening, I sat at the diner where I sometimes ate after work. The television above the counter flickered with a news segment. The anchor's voice was smooth, practiced. The video of the so-called janitor dad has now reached 12 million views. Students on campus have reportedly identified the son, a sophomore named Michael Flores. I froze. My coffee went cold in my hand. There it was, his name, spoken out loud, broadcast to the nation. The screen cut to images of the campus, then to blurred photos of him pulled from social media. The caption at the bottom read, "Student shames father internet outrage." I set the mug down before I dropped it. No one in the diner said anything, but I felt their eyes sliding toward me, curious, uncertain. I pulled my cap lower, finished my meal in silence, and left cash on the counter without waiting for change. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he hated me more now than he had before. I imagined him storming through his dorm, demanding to know who had filmed it, who had betrayed him. I imagined him cursing my name, even though I had never spoken it aloud to anyone there. But I also imagined something else. I imagined him lying in bed, phone screen glowing in the dark, scrolling through comment after comment. I imagined him reading the words of strangers, words that told him the truth I had never dared to speak. Your father loves you. He gave everything for you, and you threw dirt on his name. Shame has two faces. One burns, the other cleanses. I didn't know which one he would feel. All I knew was that, for the first time, the silence I had carried alone was no longer mine to bear. The world had picked it up, amplified it, and thrown it back at him. And whether it broke him or saved him, only time would tell. This is my son's story as I came to learn it later. These are the pieces I pieced together, what he lived while I was gone. He used to walk across campus like the ground belonged to him. Chin high, shoulders back, surrounded by the noise of his friends. But now every step seemed slower, heavier, as if the earth had turned against him. When the video first went viral, he laughed it off. It's just the internet, he told his friends. They don't know what they're talking about. But denial is a fragile shelter. It collapses the moment truth knocks too loud. And truth was everywhere, in the whispers on the quad, in the stares during lectures, in the way people stopped speaking when he walked into the room. It started with one question. A girl from his economics class leaned over and whispered, "Was that really you? Was that really your dad?" He shook his head quickly, too quickly. "No, people are just making stuff up." But she didn't look convinced. And when she turned back to her notes, he realized the two boys sitting behind her were watching him, waiting. The fraternity house, once a safe harbor, became a cage. He walked into the common room and conversation stopped mid-sentence. Laptops closed, phones slipped into pockets, a silence stretched so long he could hear the ticking of the old wall clock. "Is it true?" one of the brothers asked finally. Michael forced a laugh. "Come on, my dad died when I was a kid." "Then who's the janitor?" another pressed. "The one in the video." He swallowed hard. "I don't know, just some guy." The lie came out smoother this time, rehearsed, but even as he said it he felt the air shift. Trust has a way of leaving a room quickly, like a bird startled from a branch. Online the storm only grew. His inbox filled with messages from strangers. "How dare you? Your father deserves respect." "Shame on you, man." He tried to delete them, tried to block accounts, but for every one that vanished, 5 more appeared. Every time he opened his phone, the world was there, waiting to remind him of what he'd said. He stopped sitting in the cafeteria. Instead, he grabbed food in a paper box and ate alone in his room. But even there, the noise followed him, voices drifting through the walls, laughter laced with accusation. One night, he overheard his roommate talking on the phone. "Yeah, it's him. I didn't believe it either at first, but yeah, it's Michael. Everyone knows now." The words landed like stones, not shouted, not meant for him, but clear enough. The girl he'd been seeing finally confronted him. They met under the oak trees by the library, the same place I had once watched them in the snow. She stood with her arms folded, her eyes searching his face. "Just tell me the truth," she said softly. "Is he your dad?" He hesitated. For a moment he thought about telling her everything, the shame, the embarrassment, the way he'd felt crushed under the weight of my shadow. But the words stuck. He shook his head again. "No, my dad's gone." Her face fell, not in anger but in sadness. "Then I guess we're done here," whispered. She walked away without looking back. He stood there long after she was gone, the wind tugging at his sweatshirt. For the first time he realized he was alone, truly, utterly alone. Back in his dorm, he sat on the edge of his bed and opened his laptop. The viral video filled the screen. The girl's voice, steady and soft, played again. "There was this janitor at my school." He slammed the lid shut. But the words clung to him like smoke. He opened his phone instead, scrolling through the comments. Each one was a mirror he didn't want to look into. "If that were my dad, I'd be proud." "Some kids don't deserve their parents." "Imagine saying your father is dead while he's out there working for you." His hands shook. For the first time since the video surfaced, he felt something stronger than embarrassment. He felt the crack in his own story. Shame, when it finally reaches the bone, has a taste. It is bitter, metallic, like you've bitten your tongue and can't stop tasting blood. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw me, mop in hand, shoulders bent, moving quietly through the hallways. Not a ghost, but a man he had killed with words. The silence he had once wanted so badly was gone. Now the noise of the world surrounded him, demanding an answer, and he knew he couldn't hide forever. Sooner or later, he would have to face what he had done. The silence that once protected him had become unbearable. He couldn't walk across the quad without feeling eyes pierce through him. Couldn't sit in a classroom without sensing whispers ripple behind his back. Every time he opened his phone, the same sentence stared at him from 1,000 strangers. "Respect your father." The lie that had once been so easy to tell now lived like a stone in his chest. It weighed down every breath, every step, every word. And so, one cold evening, he made a choice he had been avoiding for years. He went looking for me. He started where he thought I might have been, Linden Hall, the building where the video had been filmed, the place where he had buried me in words and where the world had dug me back up. He walked the hallway slowly, hands shoved into his sweatshirt pocket, head down. Students passed by, some staring, some sneering, some whispering too loudly to pretend otherwise. "Is that him?" "Yeah, That's the kid. Unbelievable. Each voice pushed him deeper into the ground, but he kept walking. When he reached the lounge, the string of festival lights was gone. The tables were empty, the chairs stacked. The place looked ordinary again, just another student hangout, but to him it was a crime scene. He stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where he'd spoken those words. "My dad's been dead for years." It echoed in his head like a verdict. He went to the janitor's closet next, though he had never stepped inside before. The door was ajar. The shelves were neatly stacked now, rags folded, mops lined in order. But the thermos was gone, the boots were gone, the name tag Robert no longer hung on the hook. He realized then what the video hadn't said outright. I wasn't there anymore. I had left. And suddenly the lie he had told wasn't just a story to his friends. It had become real. Panic rose in him. Where do you find a man who lives in silence? Where do you look for someone who's built his whole life around not being seen? He asked a supervisor in the building. "Do you know where Robert went, the janitor?" The man shrugged. "Quit a few weeks ago, didn't say much. Left a note. Why?" Michael mumbled something about needing to return a lost item, then walked away before the questions could follow. That night he called my old number. It rang 3 times, then clicked to voicemail. My voice, recorded years ago, came through the line. "This is Robert, leave a message." He froze. Hearing me speak, even in that tinny recording, felt like being caught, like the lie had been dragged into the light. He hung up without saying a word. The next day he tried again. This time he spoke. His voice was shaky, unfamiliar to his own ears. "Dad, it's me. I don't even know if you'll listen to this or if you'll care. But I need to see you, please. Just call me back." He ended the call quickly, as if ashamed of the plea. Hours passed, no reply. He left another message the next day, then another, each one shorter, more desperate. By the third, he wasn't asking anymore. He was begging. Finally, he remembered the address. The one I had written on a Christmas card years ago, back when we still exchanged them. A small apartment across town above a shuttered hardware store. He hadn't been there in years. He had never visited, not once. But now, with nowhere else to turn, he typed the address into his phone and started walking. The city looked different when you were searching. The streets he had passed 100 times without noticing now seemed heavy with meaning. Every corner might hold the answer. Every shadow might hide a man he had buried in his words. He passed the diner where I sometimes ate, the laundromat with its humming machines, bus stop where I used to wait in the cold. Each place carried a ghost of me. By the time he reached the building, his chest felt tight. The brick walls were faded, paint peeling in strips. A single light flickered over the door. He stood there for a long time, staring at the stairs that led up to the second floor. His hands shook as he gripped the railing. He climbed slowly. Each step creaked, as if the building itself was warning him away. At the top, he found the door. Number 2B. He raised his hand to knock, then let it fall. Raised it again, hesitated, then pressed his forehead to the wood instead. For a moment he stood there in silence, listening. A faint shuffle inside, the scrape of a chair, and then nothing. His throat burned, his eyes stung. "Dad," he whispered. The word felt foreign, like it didn't belong to him anymore. He knocked, finally, once, twice. Then he stepped back, waiting. The door creaked open an inch, and for the first time since that night in the lounge, he came face to face with the man he had called dead. The door opened no wider than a handspan. A sliver of light cut across the dim hallway, and in that narrow gap my son's face appeared. For a second, neither of us spoke. It was as if time had stopped between us, hanging heavy in the air. He looked older than I remembered, shadows under his eyes, jaw clenched so tightly the skin stretched pale. "Dad," he whispered, and the word trembled as if it had to fight its way out of his throat. I stood there, my hand resting on the edge of the door, my body half hidden in the frame. I didn't answer. The room behind me was small. A table pressed against the wall, its surface scarred with knife marks from dinners eaten straight out of pans. A single chair, tilted from years of weight, unevenly balanced. A bed, narrow and unmade, the blanket curled like a wave. It was no place for reunions, but it was all I had. I stepped aside and opened the door. He entered slowly, as though afraid the room might swallow him whole. When I closed the door, the click echoed too loudly. He flinched. For a while he just stood there, staring at the walls, the floor, the pile of uniforms folded neatly on the chair. His eyes landed on the duffel bag in the corner, the thermos perched on top. You left," he said softly. I sat down at the table, folding my hands in front of me. My knuckles looked swollen, the skin cracked from bleach and cold water. I kept my eyes on them, not on him. "You said I was dead," I answered. The words came out quieter than I expected, but heavy enough that the air seemed to bend under them. He sank into the chair opposite me. "I didn't mean it," he said quickly. "It just came out. I didn't think anyone like me," I finished for him. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked away, staring at the wall where the plaster had bubbled from a leak I hadn't bothered to fix. "You think I don't hear things?" I asked. "You think I don't feel when my own son decides the world is better off believing I'm gone?" He pressed his palms to his knees. "I was embarrassed," he said finally. "Everyone here, their parents are doctors, lawyers, CEOs, and you were mopping the floors. They wouldn't understand." I let the silence settle. It was the same silence I had carried all those nights on campus, only now it filled the room between us. When I finally looked up, his eyes were wet. I had seen him cry before, skinned knees, scraped elbows the night his mother died. But this was different. This wasn't pain from the outside. This was pain born from within. "You know," I said, my voice steady, "your mother used to tell you stories about me, about how I worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. She told you never to be ashamed of that." He nodded quickly, almost desperately. "I know, I remember, I wanted to fit in. I wanted them to see me as more." "And you thought the only way to be more," I said, "was to make me less." He dropped his head into his hands. His shoulders shook, not with laughter this time, but with something heavier. I sat there, watching him unravel. Part of me wanted to reach across the table, to lift his chin the way I used to when he was small, when tears streaked down his cheeks and I told him it would be all right. But I stayed still, because it wasn't all right, and pretending otherwise would have been another lie. Minutes passed. The radiator hissed, then quieted. Finally, he lifted his head. His eyes were red, his voice hoarse. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Why didn't you say you were here, working? I would have done something." I shook my head. "No, you wouldn't have. You were meant to live free, to walk those halls without thinking of me. That was the deal I made with myself. I should have known." "Maybe," I said, "but you chose not to. That's different." He stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not the janitor, not the ghost. The man beneath the uniform, the one with tired eyes and calloused hands, the one he had once called Dad with pride. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The words cracked as they came out, thin as glass. I didn't answer right away. I just studied him, the way his hands clenched into fists and then opened again, the way he couldn't hold my gaze for long. When I finally spoke, it was slow, deliberate. "I never asked for thanks, I never asked for recognition, but I thought at the very least you'd never erase me." He closed his eyes, a tear slid down his cheek. I wanted to reach for him, but I stayed where I was because sometimes silence speaks louder than touch. He sat there, broken open in front of me. And I sat there too, the years of sacrifice heavy in my chest, the words I had carried like prayers pressing against my throat. I didn't know yet what forgiveness would look like. I didn't know if it would come at all, but I knew this. The dead had returned, and the living would have to face him. He sat in silence for a long while, then lifted his eyes to mine. "Will you walk me back to the dorm?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper, and though my heart felt heavier than ever, I nodded. The walk back to campus was quiet. He kept a few steps behind me as if unsure whether he had the right to walk beside me at all. I didn't say a word. My boots struck the pavement in a rhythm I had known all my life, steady and unhurried, while his sneakers scuffed the ground like a child trying to keep pace. The closer we came to the dormitory, the more the night air thickened. Windows glowed with laughter, music spilled from open doors, and I felt the world I had once walked as a shadow pressing itself around me again. When we reached the entrance, he hesitated. His hand hovered above the handle. For the first time since he was a boy, I saw fear in him, not of failing an exam, not of disappointing a coach, but fear of facing himself in my presence. "Go on," I said quietly. He pulled the door open and we stepped inside. The dorm smelled like it always had: cheap detergent, stale pizza. The faint sweetness of cologne sprayed too heavily in the halls. We walked up the stairs without speaking. Each step echoed louder than it needed to, as though the building itself was listening. When we reached his room, he fumbled with the key. His hands shook so badly he had to try twice. Finally, the lock clicked and he pushed the door open. Inside, the room was a mess, clothes spilling from drawers, textbooks stacked like precarious towers, half-empty cups lined along the windowsill. On the desk, his laptop screen still glowed with an open page of comments, harsh words marching down in endless lines. He closed the door behind us and leaned against it, breathing hard. His eyes darted around the room, landing on everything except me. For a moment, we just stood there in the cluttered silence. Then slowly his shoulders slumped. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out barely louder than a breath. "I didn't move." "I didn't mean it," he tried again. His voice cracked. "I didn't mean it, Dad. I don't know, I was stupid. I wanted to fit in. I wanted them to think I was more than I am." He rubbed his face with both hands. His chest heaved as if the air itself was too heavy to carry. "And now everyone hates me," he whispered. "Everyone knows. They look at me like I'm a monster, and maybe I am." He slid down against the door until he was sitting on the floor, knees pulled to his chest. Tears came then, not polite ones but raw, shaking sobs that filled the room and made the walls seem closer. I had seen him cry before, but never like this. Never as a man broken open, the shell of pride cracked until all that was left was the frightened boy inside. I stayed where I was, standing in the middle of the room. My hands curled and uncurled at my sides, wanting to reach out, afraid to do so. "You were never supposed to hear that," he said between sobs. "I was just trying to survive here. Everyone talks about their parents like they are perfect. I didn't want them to see you and laugh. I didn't want them to laugh at me." His words spilled fast now, tumbling over each other. "I thought if I made you gone, if I erased you, it would be easier, but it wasn't. It's worse. It's so much worse." I listened, my chest tight, my throat dry. Finally, I spoke. "You think the world laughs at a man who works with his hands. You think cleaning floors makes me less of a father." He shook his head violently, tears streaking down his face. "No, no. I know it doesn't. I know that now. I didn't want to feel different. I didn't want them to see me the way I saw myself when I looked at you, tired, worn out, beaten down." I lowered myself into the chair by his desk. My knees groaned, but I ignored them. "And what do you see now?" I asked softly. He lifted his face. His eyes were red, swollen, his lips trembling. "I see everything you gave up, and I hate myself for not seeing it sooner." He buried his face in his hands again, voice muffled. "I don't deserve you." I let out a slow breath. "You're right," I said. His head snapped up, startled, eyes wide. "No child should ever be ashamed of their father," I continued. "Not one who works, not one who sacrifices, not one who bleeds to give them a better chance. If you were truly my son, you would have known that." The words were heavy. He flinched as though each one struck him. He crawled forward then across the cluttered floor until he was kneeling in front of me. His hands gripped mine, rough with calluses of their own, though younger, less worn. "Please," he whispered. "Please, Dad, don't leave me like this. I was wrong. I was stupid. I see it now. I need you. I don't want you gone." Tears streaked down his cheeks, dripping onto my hands. For a moment I felt the heat of them, a reminder that he was flesh and blood, not just the echo of a boy I once knew. But the silence I had carried all those years rose up in me again, wrapping around my chest. I didn't know if forgiveness was mine to give. I didn't know if my heart could still beat the way it once had for him. So I sat there, his hands clinging to mine, and let the tears fall between us like rain neither of us could stop. The campus looked different the next time I returned. It wasn't the buildings. They were the same red brick walls, the same bell tower that tolled every hour. It wasn't the students. They still rushed across the quad with their backpacks and earbuds, chasing deadlines and dreams. It was the air, heavier, quieter, as if the whole place was holding its breath, waiting for something it didn't know how to name. The video had spread beyond the college now. Morning talk shows were debating it. News anchors read the captions aloud with solemn faces. Commentators argued on podcasts about respect, about class, about what it means to honor the people who raised you. The words were everywhere. No one should ever be ashamed of their father. They printed it on t-shirts. They painted it on cardboard signs. It became a chant at rallies, a line in sermons, a caption under family photos posted online. My story, our story, had stopped being ours. It belonged to the world now. I didn't plan on seeing him again after that night in his dorm room. He had cried in my hands, begged me not to leave. But my heart was still raw, too broken to know whether forgiveness was truth or just another story we tell ourselves to keep breathing. And yet, when the world began closing in on him, when every headline carried his name, when every stranger with a phone seemed to know his sin, I found myself walking back to campus. not to confront him, not to demand anything, just to see. When I reached the quad, a crowd had gathered. Students, reporters, people from town. Some held phones up like lanterns, capturing every angle. Others whispered to one another, pointing toward the steps of the administration building. And there he was, my son, standing alone, shoulders hunched, eyes hollow. The same boy who once ran into my arms after Little League practice, now standing in front of a world that had decided he was guilty. A reporter shoved a microphone toward him. "Michael, do you have anything to say about the janitor, about your father?" He opened his mouth, closed it, his hands twisted together, searching for words. The crowd leaned in. I stood at the edge, hidden among strangers. Part of me wanted to step forward to take the weight off him, to tell them the story myself. But I stayed still, because this wasn't my moment, it was his. And then quietly he spoke. "My father isn't dead," he said. His voice cracked on the word father, but he pushed through. "He's alive, and he's the reason I'm even here. Every dollar I used to sit in these classrooms, every meal I've eaten on this campus, it's because of him." The crowd murmured. Phones tilted closer. "He worked as a janitor here," he continued. "He swept these floors, cleaned these bathrooms, carried trash bags heavier than I've ever lifted. And I told my friends he was gone because I was ashamed." His eyes dropped. "I was wrong. I was selfish. And I hurt the only man who ever gave everything for me. If he can hear me now, Dad, I'm sorry. I don't care if the whole world's watching, I need you to know that." The crowd was silent for a long moment. And then slowly a sound began to rise. Not laughter, not whispers, applause. It started soft, then spread, clapping echoing across the quad. Some students cheered, others shouted his name. A girl raised her phone high, tears in her eyes. I stood at the edge, the sound washing over me. Applause meant for him, yes, but in some strange way it felt like it reached me too. That night, I didn't go back to my room above the hardware store. I sat on the bus, watching the city lights blur past the window, and thought about the strange path love takes. How it can make you a ghost, how it can bury you alive, how it can resurrect you in the most unexpected ways. My son had called me dead, and for a while I had believed him. But now, standing in the shadows of that crowd, hearing him speak my name with tears in his voice, I knew the truth. I was still here, and maybe, just maybe, so was he. The days that followed were not easy. Forgiveness is not a switch you flip. It is a slow turning, like a ship changing course in the ocean. He came to see me often, sometimes with groceries in his arms, sometimes with nothing but silence in his throat. We didn't always talk. Sometimes we just sat at the small table, listening to the radiator tick. But the silence was different now. Not empty, not erasing. It was the silence of people who are trying, who don't need to fill every gap with words to know they are not alone. One evening, he picked up the old thermos from the corner. "Mom gave you this, right?" he asked. I nodded. He held it gently, as though it were something fragile. "I remember her filling it with coffee before you left for work. I used to think it was just a cup. I didn't know it was the thing that kept you going." He set it back down carefully, like it was sacred. And for the first time in years, I saw a flicker in his eyes. Not shame, not pride, something in between, something like understanding. The internet moved on, as it always does. The hashtags faded. The news shows found new stories. The tide of outrage rolled on to another shore. But for us, the story lingered. It wasn't viral anymore. It wasn't public. It was ours again. And in the quiet of that small apartment, in the slow rebuilding of trust, I found something I hadn't expected. Not the applause of strangers, not the sympathy of the world. Hope. Because in the end, love is not measured in likes or views or trending hashtags. It is measured in nights spent waiting, in hands worn raw, in words spoken when they are hardest to say. And though I can't erase what was said, though I can't pretend it didn't cut me, I can hold on to this. He came back. He chose to look for me. And maybe that means the story isn't finished after all. Thank you for listening to this story. If it touched you, if it made you think of your own father, your own family, then let it be more than just a story. Call someone you love. Tell them you're grateful. Tell them you see them. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories reach more people, people who might need the reminder that love, no matter how quiet, is never wasted. Take care of yourselves. Take care of your family. And may your home always be filled with love, with forgiveness, and with the kind of hope that outlives even silence.